I just thought I'd get some practice reading on camera. I just got a job as a caretaker for a blind man. I'm going to be living with him. For those who know Paul Talk, everything Paul Talk did for his father, I'm going to have to do for this blind guy. He's 68 years old. He's an English PhD, former English professor. He likes to be read aloud to. I'm not making this up. This is actually happening. He's got this copy of Measure for Measure that I picked up for free at the local library. They're giving away books. Nice old edition. Folger Library. Some general readers. Good, that's what I am. I'm a general reader. I read generally. Generally, I read. Yeah, I kind of like these old editions because I like to read the foreword. Sometimes there are interesting little essays at the beginning of these. When was this published? Tokyo, Sydney, Singapore, Toronto, London. Man, Shakespeare's made the rounds. First pocket books printing March 1965. This was printed in 1965. This copy. Edited by Louis B. Wright. He was the director of Folger Shakespeare Library from 1948 to 1968. Assistant editor, Virginia A. Lamar. Executive secretary, Folger Shakespeare Library, 1946 to 1968. Roughly overlapping 10 years there at the Folger Shakespeare Library, published in New York. Copyright, Simon & Schuster, Inc. So, with your permission, Simon Schuster. I'd like to begin by reading this little introductory essay, which will be a nice refresher for me because I read this book, this play. I've never seen it performed, but I read it in a study group in college. Circa 2011. I read this in the fall of 2011. This essay is entitled Humane versus Legal Justice. Interesting title. Humane versus Legal Justice. It begins. Few of Shakespeare's plays have aroused more diverse and contradictory interpretations than Measure for Measure. 19th century critics violently condemned it as a callous and inhuman play, reflecting some deep emotional disturbance and disillusionment in the author. Quiet. So much for 19th century critics. Am I right? Just raindrops. The sound of distant cars. Not raindrops, actually, more like drain drops. Water trapped in the gutter on this neighboring abode. In any case, 19th century critics during the Steam era, for whatever reason, apparently thought that this costume drama, the play, as I recall it, revolves around some kind of marital situation that needs to be resolved. The only scene I remember with any clarity from the play is when a man goes into have sex with his wife in the dark. Only it's not the man. Something like that. Or maybe it is the man and she thinks it's not the man. I forget which way around it is. All this. But it's one of these plays, it's one of these fun Shakespeare plays that has all this sort of intrigue. It's not a tragedy. It's one of his comedies, I guess. It's a really curious comedy. Hence my interest, aka my curiosity. So other critics, presumably past the 19th century ones, have seen in it a reflection of the cynicism characteristic, they think, of the Jacobean age. Gotta remember this essay would have been written in the 60s. The 60s, I gotta say, the 1960s critics and the 19th century critics, they could almost play in the same ball league. I just noticed I gotta delete some space on my phone soon. But I'll keep on reading this little essay with the Jacobean age. So, England under Jacob. I don't want to look that up, I don't even know. You see, I'm learning too here, folks. Apparently, you know, they say that public speaking in England versus America has always been rather different in that, even at a very rudimentary level, like speaking at PTA meetings or speaking in front of a class. Because in England, apparently, lectures or talks of any kind are given as if it was a parent speaking to a child and explaining and educating them. Whereas in America, we tend to do the other way around, where it's a child showing off for the parent what they know. Gee Willikers, Mom and Dad. Versus, sit down, young lad, I have something to teach you. I have English ancestry through my my mother's father. That's all I've got. My mother's father. It was from England. Land of Eng. In any case. Prelude to the prelude. So, this problem of the cynicism, they're saying, this characteristic Jacobean cynicism, has been classified as a dark or problem comedy, or the play has been characterized as a dark or problem comedy. More recent critics, however, have taken a less unfavorable view of the play. They argue that it shows the author's concern with humane rather than legal justice. I would tend to agree. Not that I know whereof I speak yet. But that earlier characteristic in Shakespeare seems wide off the mark. From what I think. Shows his concern with humane rather than legal justice. They argue that it provides an ending that emphasizes mercy and reconciliation. Just rearrange the author's sentences here a little bit. Get rid of that gerund, that ing. It is England, after all, I guess. An ending. That it provides an ending. That it ends in such a way as to emphasize mercy and reconciliation. Still others point out that it could not reflect the cynicism of the Jacobean age because no such cynicism existed in the first year of James I's reign. Oh, there we go. Now to the reading itself, and I'll just start reading. I guess I'm supposed to be practicing my reading. Let's get through this essay for this video. So, apparently no such cynicism. The cynicism priorly led by wrongful 19th century critics. But that cynicism did not exist in the first year of James I's reign, when the play was produced. For James's ascension brought the hope of peace and a release from the dread and uncertainty that existed in the last few years of Elizabeth's reign. So blithely displaying my own ignorance of English history, I guess. After the reign of Queen Elizabeth, you got the reign of James I, which produced a kind of quiescence. And therefore, cynicism begun. The play properly has to do with the theme of humane versus legal justice. More on that now, as I simply read. In considering Measure for Measure, it is well to keep in mind that the term comedy did not necessarily imply a play with a predominantly comic spirit, but merely one with an ending that saw the main characters alive, and preferably about to be married. Although obviously Measure for Measure is no joyous comedy, it may be doubted whether its somber tone indicates a personal tragedy of some vexing problem in Shakespeare's own life. It may merely represent a mature man's reflections upon the workings of legal justice in relation to human frailty, the result of observations and experience that might come to any individual in any period. Shakespeare, we should remember, had now reached the age of 40, and a man of 40 in early 17th century England would have seen much that would stimulate his thinking about the operation of law. Clearly, Shakespeare was in a thoughtful and reflective mood when he wrote Measure for Measure, but it does not follow that he set himself the task of adducing answers to all the problems that he posed, or that he logically planned to give each of the principal dramatis personae a symmetrical consistency to illustrate such complexity in human character, or that he undertook to make his play into a treatise on moral problems. Literary critics frequently write as if they thought Shakespeare fancied himself a professor in whatever branch of learning his play seems to illustrate. In the case of Measure for Measure, a professor of ethics and philosophy. Shakespeare, as we shall have occasion to repeat, was writing for the public stage as a practical dramatist, albeit an inspired one. His primary purpose was to produce a play that would please and interest his audience, and it was not his intention to turn out a moral tract. Yet critics of the Romantic period, beginning with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, wrote as if they thought Shakespeare had betrayed the moral order in Measure for Measure. They could find little good in the play. The behavior of its characters did not fit their conception of the way Christian ladies and gentlemen, even in faraway Vienna, should conduct themselves. Coleridge regarded the play as almost a total offense, because of its cruelty, lust, and baseness. Swinburne was even more vehement, and condemned it for its lack of high moral convictions, particularly because in the end the dramatist declines to let poetic justice prevail. The arch-villain is forgiven, and suffers no worse fate than being forced to marry the girl whose dowry he had earlier found unsatisfactory. Some commentators were horrified that Claudio, under sentence of death, and knowing that his life could be saved at the cost of his sister's honor, in a moment of weakness begged her to make the sacrifice. Others were equally disturbed over Isabella's priggishness at refusing to rescue her brother by becoming Angela's mistress. Still others were shocked at the immorality of Isabella's finding a substitute in Mariana. To early 19th century and Victorian critics, scarcely a character in the play could live up to the standards required of abstract virtue. But Shakespeare was not dealing with abstract virtue, or with abstract iniquity. As always in his plays, his characters take on qualities of reality and react as men and women might in situations of actual life. Claudio reveals himself as no model of high courage when he breaks down in the face of death and begs his sister to save him. But his is a human rather than a storybook reaction. But Claudio reveals himself as no model of high courage when he breaks down in the face of death and begs his sister to save him. But his is a human rather than a storybook reaction. And Shakespeare knew enough about humankind to realize that Claudio's behavior was not improbable. Shakespeare was also aware of the impact of stern Christian teaching upon a girl of Isabella's type. To Isabella, creeping into Angelo's bed, even to save her brother, would be a mortal sin involving the destruction of her own soul. It was not priggishness that kept her from making the sacrifice, but the acceptance of a Christian code that had become a part of her whole being. She was the stuff that martyrs are made of, and martyrs were not unknown in Shakespeare's day. Mariana may not be the sort of girl who would make a popular heroine in sentimental fiction, but Shakespeare reveals her as deeply in love with Angelo and willing to go any length to get with him. To provide moral justification for her willingness to substitute for Isabella in Angelo's bed, Shakespeare explains that she had been betrothed to him and hence, in effect, was his wife. Women in Shakespeare's time and later have won their men in fashions no less devious. Other characters, as they act out their parts on the stage, give the illusion of reality. The loose-tongued Lucio, getting himself into trouble by maligning the disguised Duke, is reminiscent of Falstaff, while Pompey and Elba provide the kind of realistic low comedy demanded by Shakespeare's audience. I'm just going to pause for a moment because I thought of a couple things to say. And also the density of this guy's writing styles. It's not really for the general reader, despite what it says in the at least it seems to me, the writer, the author of this essay is just stylistically assuming, even just at the stylistic level, he's assuming a level of familiarity which may have been general in 1965, but no longer is. Even for me. Yeah. Well, kind of. What do I mean? What I'm trying to say is that these Hispanic neighbors, fun. Always having a fiesta. Ole, ole. Why did I repeat, for instance, the line that I was reading that there were martyrs? Martyrs would have been known in Shakespeare's day. Because Shakespeare was writing at a time that was still much more in touch with the on the very cusp, in fact, of Catholic and Protestant England. You know, and what that means to me, as well as hopefully the general reader, the general listener to this, if anyone cares to listen, anyone at all. This video is for the general listener. Well, when I get all professorial, I'm going to say something professorial. There we go. That's a little bit more sporting. If YouTube can be deemed a sport. You might say there are martyrs today, but largely speaking, you'd be wrong. There are martyrs today, but martyrdom in the medieval era was a much more visible, witnessable phenomenon. You know, one simply has to put oneself there. Please guide my speech, Cleo, if you care to make me elegant. Cleo, the muse of history, not Miss Cleo, Jamaican fortune teller. Cracking myself up. Okay. In any case, look at how they're dressed, for instance. I was trying to find a YouTube video I'd found a while back about the introduction of the fixed sole shoe around the year 1500. It was a big deal when people started wearing boots with fixed heels, apparently. I learned by way of this medieval historian and tour guide guy. Posted a video on YouTube I can no longer find. But people's gait was in fact different. The average person's walking gait was very different than it now is in modern times. Because prior to the fixed sole shoe or boot, people basically wore thick socks, more or less, as shoes. Like thick leather socks, maybe, but still flexible at the heel. And it would have been utterly unthinkable at that time to throw away cloth, to throw away any article of woven together fabric. Unthinkable. You know, because prior to the Industrial Revolution, all such articles were produced by handicraft. They had devices, but they were powered with a pedal or something like that. There weren't enormous mills yet to produce whole cloth in reels and then cut by seamstresses to produce clothing. which is why everyone dressed in flowing garments. In part, at least. Until the Renaissance, the upper class dressed to be magnificent. They dolled themselves up to appear as magnificent as possible, because there was a reigning aristocracy, and in fact a monarchy at the time, which, although we have some passing familiarity with such things in the modern day, mostly our knowledge of what life would truly be like under a monarchy is polluted by images from pop culture. Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, even. All of that, because really to envision the scene, almost picture it. Large stone cut fireplaces blazing with flame, and huge vaulted, huge buildings with large, tall vaulted ceilings, with beautiful paintings that could have been done by Paul Talk himself, all over the walls. So utterly different and changed. Or as Shakespeare put it in Sonnet 73, irregardless of what 19th century critics may think. Or have thought. Goes as follows, worth reciting, not just for the poetry in it, but because it brings to light an historic juncture, and it kind of makes my point for me without me having to make it. The Flight of all the Monks from England, the outlawing of Catholic Mass and such things, deprivation of the sacraments, withholding the holy sacraments. How dare they? How dare they? From the people who needed them. That time of year, thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none, or few, do hang upon the boughs that shake against the cold, bear ruined choirs, where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the dying of such light as after sunset fadeth in the west, as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away. Death's second self, it seals of all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire as on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as on the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed by that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well, which thou must leave ere long. Of course, the poem's written to an individual, but the things spoken of are those that I was just describing. fire. He's showing his creative powers. Fire of his pen upon the page. Fire of the plays upon the stage. Glowing of such fire as on the ashes of his youth doth, as on the deathbed whereon they must expire, consumed by what they were nourished by. Consumed with what they were nourished by. We are consumed, each of us, in a state of consumption. Consumption being another term for tuberculosis, a hacking cough. We are consumed. By our loves. Consumed by our loves, which on the one hand nourish us, nourish us in infancy, loves for our parents. Our later things that our loves for spouses, our loves for friends, for country, for anything really. In later years after the passage of youth, after youth has ended, is that which consumes us. Yeah. Anyway, let me keep reading now. Shakespeare was writing a play to entertain a diverse audience in the public playhouse, and he was using plot, material filled with conventional details already familiar in contemporary fiction and drama. For example, the bed trick, of climbing under the bed or something, was a motif that had appeared in other plays and tales translated from Italian to English. The Italians always do everything first, including the sonnet. One has to really fathom, really understand the tether. There was much more of a strong and binding bond. There was a bond shared between Italy and England prior to the reign of Queen Elizabeth in particular. Which persisted in popular theater, it sounds like. Even when the political order had shifted, even when the religious order had shifted, the glowing of such fires on the ashes of its youth life may also, I think, just as well describe. A little chilly out here, but may as well just as well describe this persistence of themes, of tropes, of understandings of life, basically, which are inherent to Catholic culture, and better said, even medieval culture, because medieval culture is, of course, Catholic culture. And everything that comes after Catholicism, in other words, Protestantism, sunders and breaks with medieval culture, medieval culture, medieval understandings of human nature, of human fallenness and wickedness, as well as human goodness, of virtue, of all of these things. So, the bed trick is a motif Other elements in the play were part of the folklore of the time. Folklore. Shakespeare was not inventing morbid scenes and situations because he was despondent and disillusioned with the world. A busy playwright, he picked up popular material and wove it into a play that shows evidence of haste and a composition rather than a careful concentration upon every line to produce such a close-knit philosophical tract as some commentators would have us believe Shakespeare sat down to write. So this guy's writing to the general reader in 1965. People were more literate in 1965 than they are today. That's certainly true. Without a doubt. Without a frond or a feather of doubt. Introducing my own linguistic twists and witticisms. Like ivy upon a facade. So he picked up popular material and wove it into a play that shows evidence of haste. Yes, so enough about critics. The play changes its tone near the middle and second half, and in the second half introduces low comedy scenes with Pompey, elbow and froth. This guy's name is Elbow. The other one's name is Froth. If anybody's interested, there's something that was, there's a comedy show from the 70s, a radio comedy show from the 70s called the Fire Sign Theater, which is well worth looking up if one likes such things. It's introduced to me by the guy who's current caretaker of his old roommate. Not to become my new friend. He's a blind guy. Reaching into my storage again. You know, maybe that's enough for now. I'll start the next video if I have the wherewithal with reading some of the play, or more of this, if I can get through this entire essay without inserting too much commentary. But I'm just losing steam right now, so I'm gonna go. Peace out, YouTube. Be well in my absence. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.